Here is a nice soundbite from chess. Raising your floor is a necessary condition in rating progression. Of course, how does one raise the floor in chess? Well, that's thousands of hours of work, but thankfully on YouTube, you can bypass all of that by watching 10-minute videos. One of the ways I was able to raise my floor was to play loads of dodgy gambits. Nah, of course not. One of the ways in which I was able to get to 1800 chess.com rapid or just under 2100 Lee chess is to think about the game as a game of two halves. And so there is your half of the board, and then there is my half of the board. And my objective is to maximize activity in your half and to minimize the activity of your pieces in my half. That's it, simple chess. And so here I have the black pieces play rook to c8 and threatening a move like rook to c3, hitting the b3 pawn. Now, I don't care whether Stockfish thinks there's moves A, B, C, D, E that white could play. White should just stop this. Simple as that. Stop it. A move like rook to c1 comes to mind, challenge the c file, but the top engine move in this position is bishop to d2. Get that bishop away from the f4 square where it's just a horrible big pawn. Threaten to double a pawns here for black, but also has this kind of added benefit that a human is just going to go back now. And so you're pushing your opponent back. Instead, my opponent ignores this entire thing and plays queen to g4. And this is where you have to be really careful. If you're analyzing this with the engine will just say this is fine. You're not losing, it's 0. My opponent is going for the juggler here. The h6 pawn is hanging. But we can bat away this idea. Bishop to g5, bishop takes g5, queen takes g5. A little tip I can give low-rated players is don't be afraid to play a queenless middle game. There's one thing low-rated players hate is to get queens off the board. They want to go for a quick checkmate. Don't be afraid to play these type of games. Even if we have queen takes g5, h takes g5, knight f3. The pawn looks loose, but it's absolutely fine because we have f6. Benjamin Feingold says never play f6. In this position, of course, it's absolutely fine. You can play this position. My opponent does exactly what I think they were going to do, which is to go back. And now we're in. Rook to c3. We are in enemy territory. Turn on the engine. It's going to be a little bit better here for black. The b3 pawn is hanging. And of course, you do your tactics puzzles the whole time, guys. You notice the h3 pawn immediately was hanging as well because the g2 pawn is pinned. And so my opponent finds this cute move, knight to f3, hitting the queen. We have queen to g6. And my opponent has to be really careful because the only thing protecting this knight is the queen. We have rook to b1, protecting the b3 pawn. Rook on f to c8, very natural. b4, knight to c4, and nook now. In enemy territory, we have two pieces. We turn on the engine. Doesn't matter whether it's equal material. It will favor you in most cases. And so here it's saying it's -2, -3, whatever it is. And so in this position, we have a4. The a3 pawn was hanging. We have rook to d3. And so we don't need to panic when our opponent gets their pieces in our turf because they will throw in suboptimal moves. They will give you chances to defend. And in this position, rook to d3, I'm not that good at chess, is a very suboptimal move. It allows the very good defensive move, queen to c2. And now you cannot entertain ideas of playing rook takes f3 because we have queen takes g6. And also this queen is pinning the knight because the rook is hanging. My opponent does not find this move and instead plays queen to e2, drops a little tactic. Try pause the video. See how black can get into a totally winning position now. Well done if you worked it out. I didn't find it. Okay, misses don't lose, guys. Blunders do. We're going to miss our tactics in the game. So we have here rook takes f3. Queen takes f3. The only way to recapture the g2 pawn is pinned. We have here now knight to d2. This is hanging, and of course this is hanging. This is actually the b1 rook is double attack. There is a kind of cute way for my opponent to hold the position, which is something like this. And we have queen takes g3 takes. And after knight takes b1, rook takes b1, rook c4, one of these two pawns is going to have to fall, and black is in effectively a winning position. I didn't see all this and instead played the suboptimal move, knight to a3. Don't worry, okay, about playing these suboptimal moves. You get chances later on. And my opponent now has, again, the opportunity to challenge the c-file and stop a piece getting into enemy territory. And they continue to commit the sins that they were committing before, which is playing a move like rook to b2. And of course, now we can play rook on c to c3. And we have three pieces now on their turf. And so here, the knight is double attacked, protected only by the queen. They move their king here to h2. We have here knight to c4, hitting the rook. We have rook to a2. And of course, if you turn on the engine, it's about -3. Okay, totally winning. because you've got your pieces in their half. And now, after queen to f5, cute move for me. I think it's a top engine move. We are threatening a sacrifice here on f3. My opponent plays rook to d1. For some reason, the engine prefers this, but instead I go for rook takes f3. Always evaluate sacrifices when you have an active position. And here, of course, my opponent is not going to take with their queen. They play g takes f3. We have rook takes f3. And it's a dead loss position for white. In fact, white blunders mate in 1. We have rook to g1 and queen takes h3 is, of course, checkmate. Now, you can look at this game and you can say there were a whole bunch of rubbish moves in the last 5 or 10 moves that you saw, which you thought were just rubbish from white. Okay? But I would say that the position started to deteriorate because my opponent is not paying attention. Okay? This queen g4 move is really bad. They really need to think about my piece is getting on their turf and just stopping the whole thing. One final example here, we have an equal material game. My opponent with the black pieces, according to Stockfish, is in a losing position, but it doesn't really matter too much at the lower levels. Black does have control over its half of the board for the time being. My knight is hanging. We have here knight to e3, and now black must stop any of its other ideas or whatever it wants to do and must think about knight to f5. That's it. One thing. Because once we get to f5, we're threatening the rook, but never mind the rook. We are entertaining all kinds of sacrifices like bishop takes h6 and knight takes h6, queen g3. It's going to be terrible. And so in this position, black must to the power of 100, guys, play queen to c8. Stop this. And even if I try to continue with my plans, let's say play bishop to g3, well, at least you neutralize this bishop. It no longer stays at the h6 pawn. Instead, what does my opponent do? Einstein plays queen to b7. This is a horrible move because this queen now has to spend multiple moves getting to the aid of the king. We have here knight to f5. And now the engine, if you switch it on, wants you to play something like rook on a to e8. Just give up the rook. The knight is too strong. And instead, we have from my opponent, rook to e4, queen g3, very natural, going for mate here. And if they stop mate, of course, h6 is hanging, c7 is hanging. We have here g6, knight takes h6 check, king f8, bishop takes c7. Okay, well, now we're +2 on material. Rook on a to e8, my opponent goes for mate in 2. I had a good old days when you fall for that. Not that slow anymore. We have here bishop d6 check, king g7, knight f5 check, the pawn is pinned, king g8. h3, giving my king some room. Queen to d7, threatening the knight. Knight to h6 check, king g7. And now knight to g4. Okay, giving the knight a nice square here. Fast forward a whole bunch of moves. And we do deliver this fork, which is not kind of a fork because my opponent can play, give this check. And if we shuffle our king up, they have to obviously save their queen. And we have here rook takes e1, rook takes e1. The game goes on. Okay, the engine says that black is losing, but of course you should play on. Anything can happen. But instead, what does my opponent do in this position? They just hang their queen. That's it. And so a superficial analysis of this game could be something like, well, you will get very far in chess if you don't hang your queen. And that's true. Ultimately, that's true. However, I would say that that type of blunder has come from sustained pressure because you got yourself into a bad position because you had to defend. In this position, you simply had to stop the knight from getting to f5. Oh, that's it, bye.